Welcome everyone. This is Ron Hudson, a part of the True Influence team, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, Getting More Revenue from Marketing Automation by Developing Lead Management, featuring Carlos Hidalgo. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few procedural tips for today's event, given that we have a few people online and we have a lot of content to cover within a short period of time. All lines are muted right now. And let me just let you know this, that the best way to submit questions, because we do want you to do that, is to use the GoToWebinar Q&A function that you see on the right side of your screen. So feel free to submit your questions utilizing that function. And also do that throughout the presentation. So if you have questions, definitely enter those questions there so that I can let Carlos know about the questions that you have, and he's more than willing to answer them throughout the presentation as opposed to waiting for the Q&A segment, which we will do as well. We really do want to answer all your questions, so definitely post those there. Today we're going to also be using a hashtag on Twitter, so if you're following the conversation on Twitter or want to join in or make comments about the presentation on Twitter, just use the hashtag that you see on your screen there, B2B Lead Management, abbreviated MGMT. Again, just use what you see there on the screen exactly as you see it, and definitely follow Carlos on Twitter as well. And now I want to go ahead and introduce Carlos Hidalgo formally to you. He is the CEO of the Annuitas Group, the leading provider of sales and marketing process consulting services. In his role, Carlos has helped their clients, or Hidalgo and the Annuitas Group has helped its clients identify over $600 million of potential revenue by developing and implementing lead management processes. Prior to the Annuitas Group, Hidalgo was responsible for global SMB marketing at BMC Software. In this role, Hidalgo was responsible for all aspects of marketing and customer relations for the SMB line of products, including creation of strategic messaging, go-to-market strategies, management of all customer communications and demand generation activities. Prior to his role at BMC Software, Hidalgo held a similar role at McAfee Incorporated. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Carlos.
Ron, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank you and True Influence for giving me this opportunity. So hope everybody is having a great day. I also want to thank everybody who is on the phone as well. So let's get started and talk about how to gain more revenue by developing your lead management process and coupling that with marketing automation. Before we get started, I do want to just cover the topics we will cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about who the Annuitas Group is, the typical lead generation approach that is taken by organizations, the new B2B buyer and buying process. Then we're going to take a snapshot at marketing automation technology. We will then take a look at the technology barriers. We'll look at how lead management should be defined, the revenue impact of process, and then how to get started with lead management. As Ron mentioned at the start, if you have questions, please submit those, and we'll get to those at the end and even some during the presentation. Quite simply, from an Annuitas Group perspective, our mission is to help our clients deliver a measurable return on marketing and sales practices. If you look at the statistics that have come out recently, over 52% of companies still can't measure basic return on investment. And so we believe the best way to do this is to develop a process. We do this through our practice areas, including lead management process audit and discovery, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, our lead management framework development and implementation. We help our clients select the right technology and implement the right automation solution. And then we also provide campaign management and advisory services. These are some of the clients that we've had opportunities to work with in the past. You'll notice some very well-known names there like McAfee, CA Technology, Pitney Bowes. You'll also notice some organizations that are not as well-known, but I think this highlights the fact that each organization, no matter large or small, should be focused on this area of process development to get more from their sales and marketing investments, and more specifically out of their marketing automation technologies. So let's take a look at the typical B2B marketing legacy. And this is a comic that was put out by Marketing Sherpa a number of years ago, but I think it's still very applicable. And if you can see there, the Monday morning after the trade show, and this is where the marketing manager comes back from the trade show booth and dumps these leads on the desk of a salesperson, and you can see the response there is this, no, please, no. And what's happened is salespeople are having to weed through names, not even leads, but true names, to make sure that they, in hopes that they find the right one. And you could take this comic and you could apply it to a trade show, you could apply it to an email blast, you could apply it to a web form that sits on a website. And the traditional way of doing demand generation in many companies has been to take any response that comes into an organization and pass it over to sales. The thought behind that is that sales wants to engage those people. What salespeople really want to do is sell, bottom line. They want to be able to make money, and they're going to do that by selling. And so this traditional way, this old way of doing demand gen should not apply anymore to any organization in any space. Why is that? Well, if you take a look at today's B2B buyer, Marketing Sherpa did a study around this buyer and showed that 70% of those responses are not yet ready to buy. In fact, only 12.5% of those who initiate their first contact with you as a company are ready to buy, and another 17.5% should be discarded altogether because of bad information, or they simply just don't meet your ideal customer profile. So when you take that 70% and pass them over to sales, they're not ready to buy yet. We want to try to sell to them. And today's B2B buyer will give you the buying signals when they're ready to purchase. And to try to force a buying decision on them will only alienate them further. This is more information that shows that today's B2B buying process has changed. So this was a study that was done by Demand Gen Report last year that talked about traditional buying patterns, where traditionally we had an established budget, we had criteria outlined, and then the organization would distribute an RFP. According to this study, over 83% of organizations said, no, we didn't have a traditional buying journey. We didn't have a traditional buying path. We didn't go through the traditional steps that would lead us to a buying decision. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and especially the advent of social media has completely changed the way buyers buy. They now can network with each other and have discussions with each other, and they can start to inform themselves on buying decisions before ever engaging one-on-one with an individual salesperson. So sales is being moved much further down the funnel. In fact, Gartner says by the year 2020, customers will manage 85% of this relationship without ever talking to a human. So much like we do on the consumer side, when we buy products for ourselves, businesses are doing the same thing, which is no surprise because people make up business. And so people are starting to go online, talk to each other through social media and user groups, and get a better understanding of what product or service they need. They identify that need, and then when they're ready, they will start to engage with a vendor. And engagement does not even necessarily mean engagement with sales. So let's take a look at marketing automation and take a look at this engagement. Up here we have these traditional marketing efforts and these lead sources that come in. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is a general list that shows we kick off these marketing efforts. One thing I will note is that part of your marketing efforts should be an inbound component as well, making it easy for people to come to you and to find you and to initiate with you. This then comes into this area of the marketing database, and this is really what makes up much of marketing automation. It's the housing of that data within the organization that you can then work with. We then bring it into, once that individual comes into the database, they come into some sort of lead qualification or lead scoring mechanism. And we'll talk about the process side of this, but what happens at that scoring is we have identified certain behaviors and certain demographics that a contact should meet in order to be scored appropriately. At that point, depending on the score, we can either route them to the right to our sales team and make sure that that contact is loaded into a CRM technology, or we send them into a nurture. So if you remember that 70% slide that I showed about Marketing Sherpa, this is where 70% of your contacts from an initial response standpoint should be fed, because the goal is to continually engage them and to work with them to make sure that they can make a more informed buying decision. At the same time, we want to have the right reports sent over to our executive team so they know what we're doing with the marketing dollars that we are spending. So this is a very good snapshot of marketing automation from a very high level, but if you're new to marketing automation, you'll see that this gives you a general view, and you'll also notice three important things, that it involves marketing, sales, and executives. There's kind of this theory out there that marketing automation only involves marketing. If you're embarking down this path, make sure you are involving your sales team and getting your executive buy-in before purchase, or you'll have very little success. While the technology is great, and we at the Annuitas Group are big believers in marketing automation, there is still a fundamental problem with technology. And you'll see three statistics here on the side that show this problem. 44% of marketing automation owners stated that a lack of people skills was a limiting success factor for them. So this was also a lack of people as well as process was a limiting success factor for them in receiving the full value from their marketing automation. And in another study done by Demand Gen Report, only 43% of respondents who own marketing automation leverage more than half of their solution's full features and functionality. And then Serious Decisions has put out information that shows only 25% of marketing automation owners are getting the full value from their solution. So what you see here is many organizations have jumped right to the technology component and purchased marketing automation without giving forethought into the process or the technology. And so what happens is this chart here we have on the side, or this graphic, which is done by Forrester Research, which shows, yes, we can automate the information out to our prospective customers or to our prospects, and we can fill the top of the funnel. But if we don't have a process that defines top of the funnel all the way through to sales close, we have this gap that occurs and warm leads leak out of this funnel. And right in here is where we leave tremendous amount of revenue potential on the table, and we also have a very constricted sales pipeline. When you combine process along with technology, this pipeline becomes more linear, this hole is closed, and you're truly able to manage each and every relationship. As we go on, I will encourage you, if you have a question, to please go ahead and submit that. So we're back to technology and process. Gartner again came out with a study just recently, this past spring, that showed that companies that focus on improving lead management process will increase their overall revenue 5 to 10%. That's a significant amount of revenue for organizations to think about. Even if you're a small organization, what does a growth of revenue of 10% mean to you as an organization? This was just one study. Serious Decisions has done another study that shows the revenue increase can be actually quite more dramatic than 10%. So we've been talking about process. We've defined marketing automation. Now we've talked about process, but I think we have to understand and define what lead management process is and what it is not. When many organizations talk about lead management, and I was in a meeting yesterday where an individual was talking about their expertise in lead management, and he said, we do a lot of work around lead scoring and lead nurturing. And while that's great and while that's important, those are only two pieces of the overall lead management framework that organizations need to consider. Secondly, it's not a practice of individual silos, so you can't just address only lead scoring or only lead nurturing. You have to really look at lead management from a holistic perspective. And then lastly, it's not technology, but it's supported by or enabled by technology. Any organization that talks about lead management automation or lead management technology simply doesn't get it. I've never seen technology be implemented and all of a sudden a process be developed. You have to have the process first and then the technology to enable it. So let's take a look at what lead management is. Lead management, quite simply, is the operational response to the buyer's power. We talked early on about this buyer changing, how they have much more information at their fingertips through social channels and peer-to-peer networking. We have to manage that relationship accordingly. Again, it's a process that includes data, lead planning, lead qualification, which includes the scoring component, lead nurturing, lead routing, content blueprint, and metrics. And lastly, I think it bears repeating, lead management is not a technology. It is a process that is enabled by or then supported by technology. So when we talk about the lead management framework, this is the way that we represent this to our clients. And we do it this way to show that lead management is the central thing that has to hold or bring marketing automation to that next level to help you improve those revenues. But at the same time, all of these different seven process areas should be intertwined and interconnected. So let's take a look at a very common example. It's going to be very difficult to have an effective lead nurturing program if you don't have a solid content process that can feed your nurturing. If you don't know what content to send to a prospect at the right time in the buyer journey, you won't have as effective a lead nurturing program. And in many times, all you'll be telling the prospect is, we really don't understand you, and we're treating you the same as anybody else. At the same time, it'll be very hard to have a solid lead qualification process if you've not taken the time to define your lead routing rules, set up your business rules, and enforce those with service level agreements. So those are just two examples as to why it's so important to look at lead management as an overall process. So let's take a look at the revenue impact of this process. I mentioned earlier that Sirius Decisions had a study that came out that showed the revenue impact. And what we have here is we have on the left an organization that has no marketing automation platform and no process. On the right side here, we have two organizations, both of whom own marketing automation, one with no or very weak lead management process, or one that just has a foundational or average process. And while we won't take the time, because we don't have it, to go through every stage of the waterfall, what you see here are some interesting things. By developing processes and becoming more aware of who your buyer is and being able to do better segmentation, you're actually going to generate a higher number of responses at the top of the funnel than if you have no process and no automation, or even if you have just technology on its own. You'll then see that you're going to qualify fewer of those in the marketing qualified state. Why is that? Well, because you know exactly who you're trying to target. And the goal here is not to send a quantity of leads over to sales, but to send the most quality or the most likely to buy. And you can see how this starts to cascade down through the funnel. When you have process coupled with technology, your conversion rates at each stage increase to the point where you actually have an increase of 3% more sales conversions than with technology alone. So how does that translate to revenue? Well, if you look at these two numbers, if you have an average sales price of $50,000 or an average sales price of $150,000, the revenue increase is quite dramatic. You go from $60,000 to $250,000 with a $50,000 ASP. and from 180 to 750 if you're more of a high-ticket enterprise item. All this just by developing lead management process and letting it be enabled by your technology. So again, while we're big believers in marketing automation technology, if you're starting down that road, or even if you own marketing automation and are saying, I really need to get more from this solution, you may want to look, and we would strongly recommend that you start to understand that it's most likely the process. Don't focus so much on switching out your solution if you haven't addressed your process first, because most likely it's not the problem with the solution. The problem is you don't have a process to manage the engagement with your prospects. So how do you start down the road of lead management and getting more revenue from your technology investments? Well, first and foremost, use today's webinar and that lead management framework as a guide. We've defined lead management for you. We are the leaders in this space. And so I encourage you to take that lead management framework as a guide and start to use it in your organization. Secondly, find out what you don't know about what's going on in your organization. And that seems like a rather silly thing to say, but many organizations don't have a deep understanding of the gaps that currently exist in their organization. So conduct a discovery audit. Any group or any resource that is a part of the demand generation strategy in your organization or touches any part of the sales waterfall should be part of this discovery and audit. That would include marketing, sales, operations, finance, IT. It may even include your channel partners and some outside agencies. Once you conduct that audit, establish a plan to fix those gaps and prioritize those gaps based on revenue and customer engagement impact. Understand that this is not going to be an overnight fix. This will take time, but it's well worth it. That is all for our webinar today. This is my information. If you'd like to engage more on Twitter, email, or by phone on where you are today from a lead management perspective, please feel free to call me. I love talking about this stuff. I love seeing organizations reach their greatest revenue potential. And the way we see organizations do that today is through a combination of solid lead management process coupled with marketing automation technology. I'll now turn it back to Ron and field any questions that have come in during the event.
Great. Thanks, Carlos. I'm looking for questions right now, and while I'm waiting on questions to be submitted, I'll pose a question to you, Carlos. I'm curious to know, what are some of the common gaps that show up during that audit?
Yeah, that's a great question. First and foremost, I would say one of the things that we see, where we see most organizations lacking, is in the area of data. Many organizations do very little in the area of segmentation and the creation of personas, and then it's almost astonishing to see the number of organizations that just have very dirty data and a lack of a hygiene process. When you consider that that database is one of the strongest and most valuable assets of an organization, it's very hard to market or sell to people that aren't going to receive your message. And so we see a lot of organizations fail in that area. And then secondly, this whole area of defining every stage of the waterfall. We see a lot of organizations want to jump right into lead scoring, but not take the steps to define what do we really mean when we say response, marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, so on and so forth.
So dirty data is one of the bigger gaps that show up during the course of the audit. And,
absolutely. Absolutely. And that can mean anywhere from duplicates where marketing history is being attached to an incorrect record. It could be that person's no longer at the company. Oftentimes what we see, and I do this at conferences, I ask how many people can remember the last time they undertook a data hygiene project, and usually we get less than 5% of the hands that go up.
Wow. And looks like we do have a question here. Let me see. Oh, he's asking a question about whether the presentation will be available. Yes, it will be, Chad. We will make it available within the next 24 to 48 hours at the site, trueinfluence.com. So be on the lookout for that. Anyone have questions for Carlos? I know he did a great job, so you may have been so thorough that they don't have questions, or they are all contemplating everything that you said very deeply.
Well, and as I mentioned earlier, if there are any follow-ups, sometimes after you get some chance to chew on this information, there's my contact information. I will reply to every email question that comes in.
Okay. Well, great. Well, since I'm not seeing anyone submit any questions, I certainly want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Carlos, for delivering the content, valuable content to our audience. We do appreciate everyone participating in this True Influence event, and invite you to visit trueinfluence.com or leadpackonline.com to find out about upcoming events, as well as find out more about our company. Again, thanks from all of us here at True Influence, and thank you again, Carlos. We now conclude the webinar.
All right. Thanks so much, Ron.
No problem. Thank you.
You bet. Let me know when that's posted online, and we'll push it out socially.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.